Today I'm speaking with Phil Drysdale. Phil, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
And Phil and I I've been trying to speak with you for a while, both mentally in my mind. I've been waiting to have a chance to invite you. We had some time set up before and we had to reschedule, but I just want to put it out there before I do the bio that Phil is someone that I look forward to every interview, really, I should say. Everybody's special and everybody's got a really cool story to tell. But I've been looking forward to speaking with Phil for a while, and I think you all will see why as we go through this. And also, just if you don't know Phil, you'll get connected hopefully through the links beneath our video to other things that Phil's doing, which is amazing. But Phil's been doing these kind of conversations a lot longer than I have, and hitting some really important points. And I hope some of those really pop out to everybody. Phil Drysdale is a public speaker, a podcaster, and a researcher specializing in the area of deconstruction. And for the last 10 years, he's helped people navigate the painful journey away from their faith tradition. Phil does research into the deconstruction community through the Deconstruction Network, which again, we'll have some links beneath the video. He also runs a regular podcast about deconstruction and provides resources to help people on their journeys. And Phil and his wife, Tilly, and their new puppy, Maya, live in Manchester, England. Can you tell us a little bit more, besides that more broad scope, more about yourself?
Sure. I mean, gosh, I could talk about myself all day. I'm just me. I'm just a regular guy. I'm not that exciting. I'm not that interesting. I spend most time inside watching TV with my wife, playing with my puppy, playing video games, researching. I love researching. I will spend a whole day researching the reproductive system of kangaroos if I have a chance. Just pick a topic and I will read about it and learn about it, and I love it. And so I've always got plenty of fun facts to throw out, and that's just something. I've got ADHD. I'm autistic as well, so I can hyperfixate on certain topics for like a day and then never touch it ever again. But I know everything about it after that day. I feel like it anyway. So yeah, awesome. I'm a kind of a boring person though, as far as like you wouldn't want to hang out with me because I just spend most of the time inside.
No, that sounds good.
I do hang out in a community. We've got lots of friends. We do bouldering and go for walks and different stuff. Go to the pub most of the time. And so I'm not always.
Pub culture is like British. Are you a pub person?
I was before 2020.
Are they still closed in your area?
No, I mean our government's all over the place, but sometimes not. But yeah. On the whole, they're open, but me and my wife are probably more risk adverse. I think part of my autistic side, I'm very easily overwhelmed by certain things, and so I've kind of avoided. I say that I was in a pub last night with a friend, but I'm trying to avoid kind of busy pubs and lots of big crowds right now. So yeah,
I hear you. And your puppy Maya, how old is she?
She is 6 months this weekend. So. Wow. Yeah, she's still.
You got a lot of energy going on in that house.
Really do. Well, I have no energy, so she's making up for all the energy she's sucking from my soul.
Yeah. What breed is she?
She's a miniature Labradoodle.
Oh, nice. So, very nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, in terms of what I like to do is I love to just ask people to talk about their stories, tell where they're coming from. I know a lot of your story from your videos, and I hope some other people will take my advice and go look at your channel and look at your shows after we're done here or even before, if you want to take a break from this and come back later. But you've got some interesting aspects. Your story is in some ways typical, but in other ways, you've got some very interesting high and low points that I'm really looking forward to hearing about. So if you could tell us where your faith journey took you.
Sure. Yeah. I'm a pastor's kid. I grew up in the church. I got saved every other week, plenty of altar calls, plenty of, do you really know Jesus? And going through the salvation prayer in Sunday school as a kid, and then altar calls as a teenager and all these kind of things. Probably as a kid, I wasn't that invested in the church. I found my parents' faith really relevant. I saw how it worked for them day in, day out. And my dad was a great guy. My mom was a great guy. They were pastors. They made nothing. If they would have made more if they'd gone on welfare. They were always in small churches. They were in poor communities. They opened their doors. They let poor people come in. They let homeless kind of come in. They just opened the doors always. They were always there helping people, gone day, night, everything. And so they were your kind of like, they weren't your mega church pastor. They were your kind of mom and pop local church pastors that probably may do some real harm because of some systemic theology and different things like that. But generally speaking, we're just really nice people that wanted to help people. That was their whole thing, is they just wanted to help. And so I saw that and I was like, that's relevant. Yeah, but that means a lot. of different things. So Americans hear Baptists and they hear a very specific thing. In America, denominations are much more segmented. And also in America, you hear Baptists and you think of a type of Baptist. There's a lot more Baptists than most people think of. Yeah. Like to give a point, so the Baptist denomination started because they felt that there was too much emphasis being placed on the Bible in the Protestant movement and not on Jesus, and that people were getting too dogmatic about faith and too black and white, and actually it was all about relationship with Jesus. That's how the Baptist church was born. Now, if I say Baptist to you, what do you think? You think black and white, fundamental, all about the Bible, right? It's like maybe Christ-like if they fluke it by mistake, you know? Whatever Christ-like means, you know.
Probably King James.
Yeah. So when I say Baptist, my dad was a charismatic, my mom was a charismatic. So already you're like, wait, Baptist charismatics? They weren't that worried about the inerrancy of the Bible or things like that. Like they read the Bible, they loved the Bible, they used the Bible to preach from and to inform them how to live life, but probably in a more nuanced, selective way than a lot of people might come across in an American Baptist. So I always feel I have to create this whole story around the fact that my parents were Baptists, because most people hear Baptist and they have an idea, and it probably wasn't what you were getting at my church or churches. My dad moved around a lot. He was a very evangelistic kind of guy. He would get people saved nonstop. But actually what happened is a lot of people would leave the church because all the people who was getting saved they didn't like. So he'd get someone saved and they'd be like, oh, that person, they got divorced 3 years ago and they don't deserve to be in a church, or that person's, she had an affair, or, you know, like, and like, so all the old fuddy duddies wanted to like kick my dad out, and all the new people coming in were all the kind of questionable people that, like, it's so ridiculous. You talk about it and it's like, wait, is this the same Christianity that Jesus and, you know, much of the New Testament kind of like portrays? Whoever wrote all of that, and, you know, whatever, put that aside, it's a very different story than don't let them come. That's not really a message in much of the New Testament, really. And
you would think so those would be the people you'd be aiming for, you know, it's crazy.
Absolutely. Right. And so I saw my parents and I was like, this is really, admirable. I kind of despised them a bit because we were poor and I never got to buy new clothes. I always had secondhand clothes from the charity shop or from people dropping them off at the house, and we like would get food dropped at our doorstep to help us. You know, I mean, we were really poor. And it was because we literally gave everything constantly. So I kind of low-key really hated that as a selfish teenager growing up, you know, not particularly giving a crap about anyone else other than me. I just wanted a pair of Adidas tracksuits, or, you know, like whatever a teenager wanted, you know. But as I grew up, my dad stopped being a pastor, and he went off and decided to be a port chaplain. He was in the Navy before he got saved, and then was a pastor for 22 years. And then he became a chaplain in a port, helping people that were coming in and out of the ships. And so it was his dream job. It kind of combined his love of going to sea and pastoring and getting people saved, because he liked getting people saved. He wasn't that fussed about preaching a good sermon on a Sunday. He didn't give a shit about that sort of thing, you know. And so he loved that. He got to be on the ships. You know, they're swearing and cussing, and they're like trying to hide the prostitute they just brought onto the ship from the pastor so they wouldn't judge him. And he's like, I don't care, it's fine. You know, like, do you know Jesus? Like, that was my dad's vibe always. And I love that about him. He's like, yeah, good for you. But as he shifted away from being a pastor, our family picked a church. Like, we didn't pick a church before. We were always just, the Baptist denomination picks a church for you. And so suddenly my dad's like, oh, why don't we pick a church where there's kids? Right? Because all the churches we'd been a part of didn't really have many kids or youth. You know, in the UK, a big church is 60, 70, 80 people. You know, this isn't like America. You know, like, churches were small and often no young people, no young families a lot of the time, because the church is largely dying out in the country. And so suddenly my dad picks a church, and it has 100 people in the youth group, right? It's a big church. And I'm suddenly like, oh, this is relevant to me now, right? It's not just I can see how this helps my parents. I'm like, oh, there's hot chicks here, right? That's basically what I cared about as a teenager. But I was like, now we're talking relevant. I can connect with girls, you know, Praise whatever it was. But also there's cool kids, and there's and they seem passionate about it, but they're still cool. And, you know, I'm like, oh, I want to know about this. And so I got serious fast. Like, I remember like reading the Bible in 2 years. I went to every single meeting, like multiple meetings a week. I would go to every home group, not just one home group, multiple home groups, to go to the prayer meeting. I go to the youth group. I started to lead the youth group. I got really involved, or being a leader. I shouldn't say I led it. I was part of the leadership of that.
Can I ask you break in? You mentioned something a couple times that I certainly understand, but I just want to make sure that other people get a chance to catch up. No, you're good. You mentioned at the beginning you got saved several times, and that, your dad was concerned about people getting saved. My dad, by the way, was very similar. We could not, like, going to the grocery store was not about the groceries. It was about handing out tracts, lots of them. If he didn't get a chance to hand out a good 10 to 20 tracts, it was not a good trip to the grocery store. And if he could actually have a 10-minute conversation with somebody who'd actually stop and say, "Oh, what's this about?" And, tell me about it verbally. That was like the grocery shopping trip of the day. But anyway, what does it mean to be saved? What is that? What do you need to be saved from? And what does that process look like?
Well, it depends. So of course, like across the whole spectrum of Christianity, there's a lot of different discussions around that. To me, growing up, it was you accept that you are inherently a sinner, that you are filthy rotten before God. You're not good enough, because Adam fucked up, you need to be saved. The good news is Jesus died on a cross. He came and he took all the punishment you deserve. And if you say, "Thank you, Jesus, I want you in my life. I acknowledge I'm terrible, but I want to be good, and I want you to be in me, and I accept your forgiveness. I don't deserve it." All that kind of language. Christians are already trigger response, flaring up with my description. But, it was very, very typical of most kind of, the majority of the Protestant world would kind of understand salvation in that way. And so that's what I mean in that you invite Jesus into your heart. You accept that you are filthy rotten, but you accept that Jesus forgives you and God forgives you just as you are. And now you have a new, fresh start. You can start building a better life with Jesus. And there was the low key doubt every now and again of well, but did it work? Or am I saved? Or maybe my motive wasn't quite right. Or, but I still masturbate and watch porn. Probably not because I'm a 14-year-old teenager, but because I'm an evil person. So maybe I'm not quite saved, actually. So I need to ask for forgiveness again. So I got saved quite a few times as a teenager, but eventually it kind of stuck, and I was very convinced of my salvation. And like I said, I was leading youth groups. I was very involved. I'd started a business on the side with a couple of friends, and they were all Christian. And we saw the business almost as a mechanism for bringing money into the church and expanding, God's kingdom. It might be an opportunity, like your dad's. Maybe the business leader from that company might want to talk to us, and we'd get him saved, and then he would be giving out tracts to his employees and all this stuff. You get fired in the UK, your church, your business gets shut down or something probably. But we had these grand ideas of you could not question that I was not serious and wanted to get people saved, and was myself saved by the metrics that the average church used. That was definitely my shtick. I was in, and I was serious as well. And the thing is, I actually moved away from that church within a year because I was so passionate, so serious, that I was like, there's flaws in this church. They're not doing this enough. The Bible says this, and they're not doing it enough. I think with that church particularly, I was like, they need to be reading the Bible more and focusing on the Bible. They're doing too much. They talk without reading enough Bible verses and things. So I went to a really fundamental brethren church, kind of men on one side, women on the other. Women weren't allowed to talk, really intense. But I was like, that's in the Bible though. And so I'm like, if you say the Bible is what God told us to do, that's what it is. So I was really serious. But over time, I then started to go, you know what, though? You know what else is in the Bible? Healing people is in the Bible. And Jesus said, you should go off and heal people. And then his followers went off and healed people. So I'm like, well, I guess I should be, what on earth? I'm thinking, how do you do that? But I'd heard stories of my parents having these kind of profound experiences. And so I started searching out churches that are more focused on healing people. And so I went to some charismatic and Pentecostal churches and started to see pretty remarkable things. Some things today I'd be like, okay, here's how that works. You've got neuro-linguistic programming, you've got party tricks, you've got all sorts of different dynamics, self-deception, group mass hysteria. But some things I'm like, I don't know. To this day, I'm not really sure. It was pretty incredible. And I'm like, wow, amazing. I'm just going to put it over there and leave it. I don't know.
Did you ever come across churches where they dealt with the live snakes?
I haven't been to one. To be honest with you, I still low-key want to go to one. So but also I'm terrified of going anywhere near live snakes, so I probably won't. It's a morbid curiosity, but I can probably satisfy that enough on YouTube. But so as I progressed, I went through lots of churches. Eventually I ended up giving away my business, gave away every penny, gave away everything. And because I took seriously the whole give everything away. Like you should not have anything If you really are passionate about this, give it all to the poor. That's how you inherit the kingdom of God. And I'm like, okay, done. Gave everything to the poor, moved over to America, started focusing on studying the Bible more, studying how to be a good Christian, how to help people, how to feed the poor, how to do these like basic things, a lot of them, but supernatural things.
What was it that, like, you could have, I assume, done a lot of those things in the UK? What specifically attracted you to the US? Was there a church or a program?
I think there was a mindset developing in me that the UK is largely post-Christian, largely. Yeah. And so there's a lot of churches still here. Don't get me wrong. There's plenty of churches in America, in the UK, but they're smaller. They're not as vibrant. They aren't as successful. If you look at numbers of success, which I guess you should do if the numbers mean you're going to go to hell otherwise, right? I mean, success is get people not to burn forever. That's a pretty reasonable, nice thing to do if you can do that. And so I looked at America and I saw these mega churches of tens of thousands of people, and they're, bringing, and they're talking every single week. They go, oh, here's a story about someone that got saved this week. And here's a story about someone who got healed. And here's a story about we went and fed all these poor people, and then one of them got saved and another person got saved. And you're like, wow, I want to go to this place. I want to go where people are actually doing it. They're not just going to church, they're doing it. And I think you can say what you like about, I often look at the most extreme Christians. I look at the Westboro Baptist Church as a great example, right? Westboro Baptist Church, for people that don't know, is one of the most despicable organizations on earth. It's just horrendous. They will picket funerals of soldiers, of gay people, different things. They picketed at 9/11. They said it was God's judgment, and it's because there's gay people in the country, and it's because they're evil sinners. And they're just really fundamental and radical. But I often say, to be honest with you, I actually think more of them than most people that go to churches. Because the truth is, they believe people are going to go to hell unless you believe the right thing, which is what they believe. And they are out there doing everything they can to get you to believe the right thing. Now, you could argue their methods are pretty grim, but their methods are the only way they believe is right. Whereas most people in a church in America believe that their neighbor is going to burn in hell for eternity. And they're not tearing their door down. They are not screaming and pleading and crying as they clutch their shirt, going, please, no, please, just give it a shot. Fuck, just try. You're going to burn forever. And it does highlight that actually a lot of people don't really believe what they say. They don't really believe it to that full extent. And so I think the fundamentalist element, which was very much a part of my life, I was fundamental. I was giving away my business. I was leaving my entire life. I was moving to another country. As time went on, I started to travel and speak around the world. I spoken up to about 400 churches a year. One year I did, which was crazy. And on a slow year, I was doing a couple hundreds. Like I was every day moving to another city, another place. And I was telling people how to be a great Christian. I was getting them to be equipped to go out in the streets and, like your dad, go into supermarkets and talk to people and maybe ask them if they could pray for them, so that maybe they could pray if their brother got healed or something. Maybe they would then get saved. They go home and they talk to their brother and they're healed. And, I talked to this guy in the supermarket and he prayed for you and now you're healed. I'm going to become a Christian now, right? And that actually happens on some level. Now you can talk circumstantial and all these different components of why it happens. Put that to the side. It does happen. And people do then decide to follow Jesus, Christianity, join a church. And that was me. I was, so people often frequently talk about deconstruction. And we could maybe talk about some of what that is, but it's a much broader term than things like de-church or deconversion and things like that. But they talk about this and they often say, well, those people never really believed. And I often laugh because I'm like, I would come and visit your church as what effectively in a business world would be as like a consultant coming in and telling you guys how to be better Christians. But you're right. I never really believed. I would sit and talk to your pastor for 8 hours while I was there for the weekend, consulting on how he could operate his church better, how he could get more people to join his church, how he could be a better Christian, how he could communicate better. But you're right, I probably wasn't saved. I was the one that gave away everything I owned. But you're right, I probably did that through some weird deception that I was building a long 20-year game so I could somehow make no money telling people how to lose their faith. I don't know. Well, I'm not sure what the positive in this long play is, but I'm somehow deceiving people.
You really bring out
sorry, jump in.
A good point, though, that if you are convinced that Christianity is correct and someone chooses to walk away, there's no choice in your mind but to find some way to explain it away, like the option of maybe, like whatever all the options could be, the option of maybe they had really good reasons to leave and this was a really healthy choice, that can't be on the table. It just can't be. And I'd like to dig into that a little bit more with you too when we go into deconstruction, but could you take us back a few steps? Let's look at maybe when you were, early teens and so forth, and you're really getting to a point where intellectually you're understanding some of the mysteries of the kingdom, so to speak, the mysteries of the gospel. Maybe as you hear sermons, I assume as a good Baptist that, the reason that we are Protestants is because we're not claiming that we can be earning salvation, that this is not about, if I'm good enough, God will let me in. This is relinquishing any efforts to claim to being good and just saying, like you said, we're filthy, we're rotten before God. And that if we will admit that we come as beggars, saying, God, I have nothing to offer you, nothing whatsoever, that in that transaction of salvation, he's substituting, he's saying, you're a sinner, and that sin's going to get punished one way or the other. Either you take the punishment or someone else does. And of course, obviously, the glory of the gospel is Jesus is going to be your substitute. He will take your punishment for you, and not just take your punishment, but he'll also put on you his righteousness as a covering, so that when God sees you, he doesn't just see you as, well, you were $1 billion in debt, now you're a zero. You're actually $1 billion in favor. You have his righteousness applied to you. In that sense, once you start to really dig into that, and hearing sermons, I assume, about the Holy Spirit and sanctification, and all these things start to click. You're not a little kid anymore, and you're just in your own private time with God, your devotions, or maybe you're in a youth group setting where it's really hitting home. This isn't some boring old preacher that's just going wah wah wah, but they're actually like, you're really connected with what they're saying, and maybe too in the sense of like just the inner emotions of like, I'm feeling something's different now. Before I was a Christian because I grew up in a Christian home, but now I'm feeling Christ. I'm feeling the Spirit moving in my heart and my mind. What did that look like to you in the quietness of your heart? In the quietness of your heart, listening to a sermon, or in a room doing, a private reading with, time with God. We used to call it devotions. I don't know what everyone else calls it, but devotions or your private time with God. What did it look like? And did you get the sense that God was actually like talking to you and watching you and walking with you and giving you direction? Like if you were like, God, they tell me I should think about what my career should be someday. God, please lead me. Should I be an accountant? Should I be a carpenter? Like what kind of sense did you have of your private connection with God?
Sure. That was there. I was, like I said, like I was a dog with a bone. I was obsessive. Like everything in my life was secondary to being a Christian. That was all that mattered. Being in business, having friends, everything, all of that was built upon a core foundation of I am a Christian and I'm walking with God, and God is in every single step. I was quite obsessive. I would like not make decisions without thinking about it, praying about it, reading the Bible, asking God for direction. And I definitely felt I got direction, and sometimes quite miraculously, it seems. I remember when I first left school around that time when I first started, and I was like, God, I don't know what to do. And I got this job and I was doing it, and I was like, I don't know, maybe I could keep just doing this. And I was like, maybe I should go to uni. And I remember praying to God, since college for you guys. I remember praying to God, like, God, should I go to university? Like, can you show me a sign? And that was at lunch. And I got home and my mom was like, oh, you've got a letter. And I opened the letter, and it was from, there's a governing body in the UK that handles all college applications. So you write to them and they then let the universities know, let them know, all that stuff. And it was 3 acceptances to university from different places. And they were all in really interesting courses I'd be really interested in. Only thing is, I had never applied to university. And so I was like, okay, prayer answered. Now, I don't know, maybe my form teacher from school put in some applications for me. I don't know, like it would be illegal, but I don't know the story. I don't know how it happens. I'm sure there was a rational answer, right? You and me will both wires start firing your brain and everything start moving around to give us a nice rational answer. And I'm sure there's plenty of rational answers we could tick off before we get to the completely irrational answer that God applied to university for me. But at the time, I don't care. Like I literally prayed 4 hours ago on my lunch break, God, will you tell me if I should go to university or not? And suddenly I get acceptance letters to university that I didn't apply for. Like, I'm like, clearly I should go to university. So I went to university. And so things like that were constant in my day to day. I can be reinforcing all these coincidences, and we can talk about how you do that. But I think that's kind of irrelevant how it works. It doesn't matter to someone that is living with this core foundational fundamental approach. They don't actually care if you can explain it away. They have their answer. They prayed to God and God answered. It doesn't matter if you can go, well, this could also be an explanation. You could have told me 100 times, 100 different reasons that were all more plausible, and I still wouldn't have heard it. I don't think I would. And so that was me through and through constantly. I laugh, but like at one point, so some people talk about the quiet time and their devotion. Sometimes I don't know what circles it was in, but people talked of you going into a prayer closet. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. I don't know what the reference was for that, but I literally had a sliding door in one of my apartments. I had a sliding door that would go into the closet, and I literally would crawl into the closet and I'd push the sliding door on the other, because you don't have a handle on the wrong side, push it in, and I'd sit in the pitch black, and I'd go in there at 5 a.m. and I'd pray till 7 a.m. every day in the pitch black. I just pray for 2 hours. Now, a fair few times I fell asleep, but I was passionate. I was getting up at 5 a.m. Other times when I was really charismatic and they did things called tongues, which is like a magical speaking, the spirit speaks through you. And that's a fascinating one we can look at, that most religions around the world have experiences of glossolalia, and it's a common thing and all that different stuff. But I would get up and I'd walk around the neighborhood for an hour in the morning every day, praying in tongues, letting the spirit pray for my neighbors. And I would feel, and then when I did have, like your dad, suddenly someone in the supermarket talks to me, it's because I got up and prayed that morning that I would have an impactful encounter in the neighborhood, or, and so you're constantly seeing everything through the lens of God is speaking to me, I'm speaking to people, and God is speaking through me, and seeing everything through that spiritual lens. And so to me, there was no doubt in my mind through that whole time if I was saved, if I was connected to God. There was maybe times where I questioned if God was pleased with me. Maybe, again, a good example is, and this is really common throughout most Protestant Christianity with purity cultures and things like that, is as a teenager, I would maybe watch porn or something, and I'd be like, oh, maybe God's disappointed in me. Maybe he's removed his protection from me, or whatever. I need to ask for forgiveness. But never did I think I'm not saved anymore. And so even when I'd done something atrocious, like masturbating, God forbid, I probably should have killed someone, it'd be better off, but, even in those terrible moments, I still was very convinced I was saved. I was still convinced that God was with me, and things like that. And so, you just couldn't question if I was serious about this. I was a poster child for this. People, when I traveled, they would poke their kids. They would bring their kids and go, be like that guy, right? And these same people now go, don't be like that guy. That guy's Satan. Exactly. But, everyone wanted to emulate the guy that shows up and preaches a great message and prays for people at the end, and amazing things happen in their lives. Like, that was me. And I believe that. I really felt it. Like, and maybe especially in a big headed way, but also just in a general way of like, no, I really feel that God's speaking to me, and I really feel I'm helping people. I really feel people are coming up to me and going, when you said this, it really helped me, and it made me feel clarity in a business decision I have to make, or it may help me see the way I'm relating to my husband or my wife is maybe not so helpful, and it really has changed my relationship. And I get emails months later going, you saved my marriage, or so and I probably was doing good in some level, in some metrics, for some people that are in a certain place that could only be in a place where they hear it from a preacher or whatever. Maybe I helped people. Absolutely. I probably did astronomical harm as well. And so I'm not trying to mitigate the fact that I was part of a huge system which does systemic harm on a real, very serious level in a lot of different ways.
And but I was very passionate about it. An attractive thing too, where, people, if you get a young person
absolutely
that is just on fire and very articulate and very charismatic. We did that in the United States for sure with Josh Harris, where at a young age, with all due respect,
look at his 20-year-olds, he knows everything.
With all due respect to Josh, at that age, he should not have been telling people how to live their lives. He did not know enough, and I did the same thing. So I speak, as someone that's guilty as well. But 18, 20-year-olds should not be telling everyone else how the world works and how to live their lives. And I was just going to make a comment and then ask a question. Comment about the prayer thing. One of the things that's really funny to me is whenever prayer seemed like it was answered, like you said with the college application, whenever somebody seemed to get healed, it was like, oh, praise the Lord, this is so good. But you don't really think about it, but you realize that all the negative things that happen,
Right.
You always attribute those to God's just trying to teach you something, or you didn't pray hard enough, or this is Satan, winning, whatever. And
Yep.
it was like, it becomes this game of like, how do you interpret this? Is this, and I remember too, even thinking, if a door seems to shut in my face, so to speak, where say you would apply to that college and it seemed like it was going to work out. And all of a sudden at the last minute, they say, no, sorry, we're not going to let you come here.
Right.
And it's like, oh shoot, this was really, I guess God's leading me to not do this. But then you realize, well, maybe God's testing me. How much do you want this? And so it was this constant guessing game of second guessing God, second guessing myself, second guessing the devil, and my faith level. But it's fascinating how that all works. And I'm sure we could talk about that for a while. But I did want to make sure I also asked you to talk about the whole hell thing. You've touched on it a few times. I assume from what you've said that you believed in a literal hell. But just for anyone that's not familiar with that, from a Christian Protestant perspective, what was your expected outcome for those who rejected Christ, and did they have a second chance after death? What did it look like, and did you have any respect for people that, as a young person, where they would have said maybe, when you die, you probably just go nowhere, you just don't go to heaven. Like, how did you take other people's perspectives on it as well?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, classic kind of modern Protestant movements believe that if you die and you haven't done that process of being saved, asking Jesus into your heart, forgiveness, all of that, you go to burn in a literal hell, a place that is on fire where you burn for eternity, literally eternity. So Barbara, who didn't say yes to God, but was a great, loving mother, grandmother, wife, and Hitler are going to burn for the same period of time forever because they didn't do this one thing. And that was fair because it's about this one thing. It doesn't matter whether you killed 6 million Jews or, were a nice housewife and, your whole life. Like, that's irrelevant. Did you say the prayer?
Did you ever hear that there's certain spots that are a little bit hotter?
You do have gates and circles of hell and realms of hell. And the thing is,
and even of heaven too, maybe.
Everyone has different ideas. Yeah, exactly. Heaven was hierarchical for a lot of people. And the thing is, hell is a very complex topic with many different views throughout Christianity. But if you're in a modern Protestant movement today, odds are that would be the way that you saw things. That there, of course, are different restorative views of hell. Like some people might be familiar with kind of like a more Catholic purgatory kind of idea. So that's based on something that has been in the church forever. And then there's other components of hell not being a place of punishment at all. It's being a place of healing, of finding space to heal and get prepared for being in the presence of God for eternity, and different ideas that are all within the tradition of Christianity. But Christianity has a great way of funneling down to the right view for that group. And most of us create a God that looks like us. And generally, groups that identify as an us need a them, and they want them to burn and us to be in paradise. And so hell is kind of a natural eventuality.
With the burning part, did you, and I'm speaking as what you used to think, obviously not now, but did you at the time feel any angst about the fairness issue? Like, is it fair for, say the guy that grows up in some country where all they've ever heard of is Buddhism or Taoism, sure, and maybe they've never ever heard of Jesus, and maybe some groups don't even have a Bible in their language, or maybe somewhere else, like they may have access to the Bible, but their group is absolutely sure that Krishna is the savior of the world. And like you mentioned, people that are otherwise good, they're really, really, really loving, maybe more loving than Christians, arguably, but they don't have the right transactional gospel message applied to their sin issue. How did you feel like there was a fairness issue, or was that like, would you have defended?
There was so many different ways people, I would have defended. You had to defend God regardless. I mean, God is, there's no option for God to not be right. And so ultimately you end up going, his ways are not our ways, or, whatever. God's ways are mysterious and we can't understand them. Or, well, actually God's morality is the true morality. And so if we see it as immoral, really it's some flawed humanistic version of morality. And actually we're just not seeing it from the right perspective. There's so many different ways. And a lot of people would say, well, ultimately God would never let anyone die without giving them a choice. So like Thomas Aquinas, like even as they died, he would sit down and go, hey, everyone that's told you about Christianity is wrong. this is actually what Christianity is, and this is really who I am as God, and this is whatever. And do you really want to go to hell, or do you want to come to heaven with me? And he posited that no human would ever not choose heaven given that choice. And so he said that everyone would be in heaven. And so there's all sorts of different theological approaches, because no God could be good and not give a pure choice. Instead going, well, I sent the Westboro Baptist Church lot and they didn't say yes. And it's like, yeah, well, fuck, that's a metric of good, I reckon. Like if you don't accept the Westboro Baptist Church, you're a good person. But, so there's all sorts of different ways to engage with it. And I bounced around so many over the time. And I ultimately became a kind of Christian universalist towards the end of my my years, which believed the kind of concept that everyone would also believe that hell was a healing place and that God was good and God was love. And there was no punishment in love, which is in the Bible. There's no fear and no punishment in love, which is a fascinating concept to then believe, but God will punish you forever. And you should be terrified about that. And so, I constantly was evolving and perceiving things in different ways. And that was definitely a big thing. I can say we're going to be doing in the end of this year, one of our next studies is on reasons people start to unravel their faith, to deconstruct. And anecdotally, I know that hell is going to be one of the number one metrics because I speak to thousands of people every year, tens of thousands of people every year in my process of helping people on this journey and having those in-depth conversations. And I would say a huge percentage, well over 50%, hell is a major component. And so there's major points. There's hell, there's social justice issues of race, of LGBTQ, different things like that. There's the goodness of God, how to come to terms with the Bible, being inconsistent. There's all sorts of different topics. But number one, I would say, as being something that people really struggle to come to terms with is that, you've got Muhammad and he's born in Iraq and his parents died in the 90s when the first Bush invaded and fucked everything up. And they've messed his country up. And you know what? He grew up and he hated Americans, and Americans are Christian and he wanted nothing to do with it. And the mosque he went to talks about how evil Christianity is and how Islam is the right way. And he's never met a real Christian like me, right? Because I'm the real Christian that would perfectly represent it. I'd have the right track to give him. Is it fair that he goes to hell? And you go, everyone's done these thought experiments. Everyone's kind of played with this and struggled with it and wrestled with it. But at different stages of my journey, I would have come to terms with it in different ways. And at certain times, I would have been very fundamental and said, well, God's ways are higher than our ways, or even, well, yeah, that is fair. It is fair. I don't understand necessarily how it's fair, but that's what God does. So it is fair. It's that cyclical kind of reasoning of like, if God does it, therefore it is fair. It's not, you can't look at, is it fair first? You have to look at is what does God do? Everything God does is good. Everything he doesn't do is bad. And so, yeah, it's a fascinating component, but yeah, that hell thing is huge and is a massive stickler for many, many people as they go through the process of deconstructing.
And a lot of it comes back to the idea of just biblical authority, where you might look at other topics that are maybe less painful, but there's still issues where you mentioned women not speaking in church, which is biblical. But the issue is not, at least from my background, the issue is not, is this preachment hard to take? Is this teaching hard to understand and apply? Is this verse hard to swallow? It really doesn't matter. What matters first is, do you understand that God is the king? He is the judge. He has spoken. We are the servants, the slaves. We are the ones that are, like you said, his ways are higher than our ways, so we're lower than him. We don't understand, and therefore, don't look at the issue of genocide or hell or women speaking in church. Look at the issue first of who's your authority. Is it the word of God or is it not? Because if it's not, then you're saying I'm on the throne, I'm the king, not God. That's at least what we were told. And so once you establish God as the authority, like you said, it really doesn't matter what the issue is. There's nothing, you can't go to any verse and say that's too hard to swallow. You've already decided this is the word of the eternal king. He has spoken, I will bow my knee. And it's amazing once you get that truly across to people, where they think this book really is the word of God. Some really nasty stuff can come out of that preacher's mouth, or even just in your personal reading of the Bible, and you will, like you said, you will defend this character, this Yahweh character. Yeah. He can ultimately do no wrong because he's the definition of right. And our response is only to listen and be silent and accept what he has spoken. And it sets up so many crazy things. And I would just add to that. I think one of the hardest parts for people deconstructing and deconverting is admitting to themselves for the first time. Like, it almost makes you catch your breath. Like, I think I'm putting myself as a judge. I think I'm judging the Bible. I'm judging God.
Yeah.
And if you're not, like, if you're really in a church where they preach the authority of the word of God, that is almost a terrifying thing to admit to yourself.
Yeah, it's blasphemy. You're making yourself God.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
It shakes
it's a terrifying idea. Yeah.
It takes a lot of
we
bravery.
can't see that we're already doing that. We're already making ourselves God anyway when we choose a church, when we choose a church that chooses the Bible, when we choose a church that chooses the Bible in this way, because every church reads the Bible slightly differently, right? And it's like, it's an endless game of people making subjective choices. We just remove ourselves away from the subjective choices enough that the only subjective choice I made was to see this miraculous situation as God and say yes. And so I don't know, God moved in my life and I just accepted. And so I'm a Christian. And therefore I accept all these other people's subjective choices all the way back to the Council of Nicaea, or who knows, whatever, the Pope being established, or, whatever it is. We're constantly doing this, whether you're in the church or at the church. It's all subjective. And no one knows anything at all is real, from God, scientists right through to religious nut jobs. None of us know that we're not on a psych ward bed somewhere hallucinating this whole thing right now. Like, who the fuck is Tim Mills with his YouTube account? Some idea that some guy's having as he hallucinates a dream. You could wake up at any moment. So the point is, like, at the end of the day, we're all playing this very, very subjective game. We're all a little bit delusional that we have the right idea that is perfect and is absolute. Some of us just have maybe more reason because we have a collaborative delusion, right? So we're surrounded by enough people that all go, yeah, that is 1 meter. Yes, that's the temperature that water boils. These are fairly agreed upon because you get 7 billion people that go, yeah, okay, water boils at that temperature. When you start to get it nuanced enough, it's like, oh, so there's a God in the sky that will forgive you if you accept himself killing himself. And, these kind of... Quite a lot of people look at it and go, this is crazy. If you can get yourself boxed off enough in your group, though, it's still completely acceptable. And I'm not being subjective. I'm not just picking something that feels right. And so we're all playing this game on some level or another. I think just some of us are playing it a little bit, I don't know, more wildly than others, but more fast and loose.
A lot of people are definitely taking what's been spoon-fed to them as well and just saying there's no way that my mom and dad and pastors and teachers that are so loving and so good and so concerned about the truth, there's no way they could all be wrong. There's just no way. Yeah. But I do want to ask you, you grew up more Baptistic from what I understood, but you did get exposed to Calvinism at some point. What was that like, and how did that affect your worldview at all?
To be honest, Calvinism is deeply embedded in most of Protestantism. It's such an early established thing as far as Protestantism that you'll find core components of all 5 of the kind of main points of Calvinism will creep into most churches. You'll find most people there will know someone in that church that holds this, one of those views or 5 of those views, or some sort of spectrum within. It was like believing in hell. It was like believing in God. It was like believing we're eternally sinful. Like, all these views were right until they weren't, right? And so it's just it's such a hard one, because it was like being convinced that God heals. It was like being convinced that we should feed the poor. Like, all of these things were right, and some of them continue to be right. Like, maybe we should look after poor people, and some of them I'm like, not so sure about that one. And so, I think it just, Calvinism bled through a lot of my Christianity, and some of the churches I was a part of were much more Calvinistic than others. But again, if you take the Bible very seriously and you listen to the right person who has the right interpretation, you'll come to Calvinism. Absolutely. Just as if you listen to the right person, you'll come to the exact opposite position, because we can all play this game all day. I can read you the Bible and teach you that Satan is Lord. It's easy. There's plenty of passages that do that. So like we could do this all day. And so, I don't know. It was right, and then it wasn't right. And probably not so black and white either. It's probably like bits and pieces coming and going and bleeding in and bleeding out as I continue to evolve and grow and question things. I think that's true of anything I believed.
Yeah. It's funny. I was also pulled into Calvinism, And it did feel attractive in the sense of, like, when you really hear it preached strongly, like not a church it's kind of Calvinistic, but a truly,
Sure.
a 5-point Calvinistic church, when they start to tell you stuff like, you understand that you don't contribute anything to your salvation, anything at all, that God had to do all of it from start to finish. And that's why you are eternally saved. You're not in danger of going to hell because you didn't start this thing and you're not going to finish it. You're not the one holding on to yourself. God's holding on to you. And the idea of bringing all the glory, every bit of glory to Christ, to God for doing this, it was so attractive. And especially when you get into certain passages like Romans 9, you're just like, yeah, I think the Bible is, God chooses who he wants to. He chooses Jacob, not Esau. He chooses.
Well, it's nice because we're the chosen ones as well, right? And
yes,
everyone loves to be chosen. Why
we're
not?
Always on the inside. Yeah, we're the club.
Yeah.
I kind of went kicking and screaming into it, I would say, like C.S. Lewis would have said with Christianity. But yeah, it was a fascinating journey. I do want to ask too about marriage and divorce, if I could. For a lot of people, marriage is obviously a big goal, both because it's better to marry than to burn. And, if you're thinking about intimacy and sexuality, you want to have an appropriate and biblical place to enjoy that. And yet there is certainly a scarlet letter over anyone who gets divorced.
Sure.
How did that play out in your life? And did you feel, as things did unravel, as you get to that point in the story, did it feel like you were disqualified for ministry, or how did that all play out in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely had to navigate a lot of that. I got divorced right in the midst of me traveling and speaking and being very public, as much as a public figure as you usually are as a Christian. Maybe not on the scale as people, but certainly in the amount I was doing day in, day out.
How long had you been married when that fell apart?
3 years, maybe. I'm not very good with dates. So anything between, 3 years, probably about right. And yeah, the stuff. And I'm not an easy person to be married to. I would not want to be married to me at all, like on any level. And I'm like, I'm me. Like I still wouldn't put up with me. And so it was tough. I wasn't a good person to be married to, generally speaking. I'm a nice guy and loving and whatever, but I'm hard. I mean, first of all, I've got autism, ADHD. There's a lot of components there that make someone harder to navigate if you don't understand some of those components. And I didn't even know I was those things at that point. And so, it's really hard to do life with me. And so my wife was hitting some walls. I think she was starting to deconstruct her faith in different ways. I think I was deconstructing within Christianity still, and she was starting to deconstruct out of Christianity. And so that was complex. It created some hard things for her. She was studying sexuality and gender at university, and I was still very much in a patriarchal system, a white male, in my power trip of traveling around and telling people who they should be and what they should do. Like, that was a hard thing for us to navigate in our faith, in our relationship. And I think that was problematic and hard, and it was the best thing that ever happened to probably both of us. I actually don't know. She's kind of cut ties with me and doesn't want to really be in a relationship. She said she found it too hard to see how well I was doing when we last talked. So she says, I'm just going to kind of cut ties with that. Cool. But I think she's doing well and I'm doing amazing. I love life. But in the midst of that, certainly as you get divorced in the church, the modern church today believes that marriage is the pinnacle of success, and divorce is the worst thing that can happen. Of course, for most of the church's history, divorce wasn't an issue, and they divorced people left, right, and center. A great book on marriage is Stephanie Kuntz's A History of Marriage. She's one of the world's leading experts on marriage, and it's fascinating to look through history and go, oh, what the church posits as marriage isn't even what marriage was for most of history. Marriage is about 180 years old, the way we see it and understand it in the West. And actually, most of the world still doesn't see marriage the way we see it. And so when you read your Bible and go, oh, they're talking about how important it is to marry. And it's like, yeah, they're talking about how important it is to buy a woman. That's what they're talking about. They're not talking about falling in love. They're not talking about, starting a lovely nuclear family where you love one another and support each other. And, no, none of that at all. We're talking about marriage as power, as property, all these different things. The first instances of people getting married for love in human history is only a couple hundred years ago, outside of occasionally anomalies. So this is why you have things like love childs. Love childs are something you have with the person you love, which are outside of marriage. You marry the person for power, for connection, for family structures, and then you love someone. Go love someone, whoever, love someone down the road, but make sure that the person you marry is very important for power and connection and structure. And all that to say, the church has some weird views on marriage because it reinterprets its modern ideas of marriage and kind of mixes them with these old power structure, property, women as second-class citizens, marriage being essential, but marriage was essential in the past so that you could survive, so you could live to old age. Having kids was essential because that's how you survived and lived to old age. It was how you continued your dynasty, which was important in your name and your family business and things. And they conflate these two components where you get some really weird stuff. You get virginity being important, things like that in the purity culture movement. Virginity was important because women were property. And when they had a kid, you needed to know that they were your kids, that your property was birthing your child and not someone else's. Well, today you can guarantee that either way, if that was somehow magically important still. We have condoms, we have birth control, we've got a whole bunch of different things that you can kind of make sure that happens. So all these things are constantly changing, and the church constantly reinterprets modern day into the past and creates these weird bastardization mixes. And that's where we have marriage and divorce. And so divorce was a disaster. Some of the Bible says that if you divorce, you're disqualified and different things like that. But even when the Bible talks about divorce, it talks about multiple different phrases and different things like that. And so there's phrases like put away, which is translated as divorce, but that was a slang for when people got rid of a wife because they were too old. Or there was a better family power dynamic. So you could remarry another woman and that would be more power to your family and give you more wealth and more connections. So you would put away your last wife. And that's translated as divorce. So when they say that's really bad, but this is really good, we conflate the two and go, well, what does it mean about divorce? There's two things in there, all these things. So all these things to say, this is what I'm navigating when I'm getting divorced. I'm trying to figure it out. I'm studying it again, because I'm serious. I don't take things lightly. But on an emotional level, I'm freaking out. I'm like, well, what will I do? Will I still be able to travel? Will I be able to speak? What will I do with my life? My income is wrapped up in this.
Like you and God one-on-one, how did you process the idea? Just from a Christian's perspective,
it wasn't a problem for me because at that point I'd already unraveled so much of this topic. I think I'd helped so many. The thing is, one of the natures of when you help people and you travel around speaking and helping people is you come across a lot of people that need help. And so I had spoken to hundreds of people that had gone through this process, and I had studied it extensively to understand the different dynamics of how the Bible talks about divorce, how marriage is engaged. And I am a bit more, I lean probably a bit more academic as well, where I am open to going, well, actually, this is a bit more complex. It's not just the Bible says, because the Bible says two different things here. So I'm going to have to look at it a bit more nuanced. And so I'd done things like that, which did help me from that perspective. I never doubted that God would love me or that I'd be connected to God.
Did you feel
even more so because it wasn't my choice?
Like, did you feel disappointed in the sense of like, God, if your heart is for restoration, your heart is obviously for restoration. That's kind of the big story of eternity. Sure. Is God is making light conquer darkness, love conquer hate. He's making instead of people going apart, he's bringing them together, specifically with his bride, the church, and with Israel. He is all about unification and taking what cannot come together and bringing it together, especially at the biggest level, himself with sinners, bringing people together and making it a beautiful love story. And to think, here you are, knowing that your worldview is so educated in that, you're trying to shine it out to people. And here on the most intimate level, God could have done so many things to make this beautiful and to make it very real and tangible in your actual day-to-day life. And yet, did it feel like he kind of let you down at all at that point? I mean, I know you see it differently now, but
it didn't. So I think because at the end of the day, I recognized that God isn't going to force people's hands. And, my wife was at the point where she's like, look, I know we could probably work on this and make it work, but I genuinely don't think this is a good thing for either of us, and we need to move on. And you can't make that person be married to someone and it be a very healthy thing, right? I'm sure plenty of people have tried. And so I looked at it and I was like, okay, God's got something better for me. So I would look at it from the even higher perspective. Well, if it doesn't work, that means God's preordained all this stuff to teach me lessons, to help me grow, so that when I get married again, that'll be even better, or whatever it might be, right? Whatever the reason, maybe I'll start a divorce ministry and help people get divorced or whatever, some sort of crazy, weird, I'm the center of the universe and God's somehow mastering the whole world to work around me belief. I don't know. And so, yeah, it wasn't, I think that apart from the emotional component of someone you love going, hey, I don't know if I want to do this anymore, like, let's try and do something else, that was hard and brutal and horrible. But I think on a spiritual level, I was very secure in a lot of ways, and probably, I mean, I'd already started to deconstruct anyway at this point in some ways, shapes and fashions. And so it wasn't really a problem for me overly, as far as spiritually, or how I connected to God, or how I framed the narrative around that story and that act. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate you talking through that. And on a similar note, I wanted to ask about, you mentioned ADHD, but you've also struggled with something called Crohn's disease. What is that? And did that play into your faith journey at all? Or was that just more a backdrop to everything?
I mean, it's just something I had my whole life. It probably started around the teenage years. My mom had a brain hemorrhage and, died on the table, and they brought her back, and pretty intense stuff going on. And in the midst of all that, I developed Crohn's disease. Quite interesting. A lot of like IBS and Crohn's and different bowel conditions. There's a lot of new data in the last 3 or 4 years coming out that link them to trauma. And so it doesn't surprise me looking back and going, oh, I developed Crohn's disease around that time. And so Crohn's is a serious, of the IBS families, Crohn's and colitis and all that, Crohn's is the most serious digestive kind of illness you can pretty much have as far as it goes. Excruciating pain. I was in the fetal position on the floor 9 hours a day, some days for weeks at a time. Probably wasn't a single day for probably about 8 years that I wasn't in absolute agony for majority of the day.
Did you ever question like why God was letting you go through that at the time?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Because I was really young. I'd barely really kind of engaged with faith in a lot of ways when I first started and things like that. But yeah, I mean, why does God let anything happen? Like you can rationalize and say whatever you want. I think, again, there'd be you ask 100 people why that happens and you get 100 different answers. And so, yeah, I did. And I probably would give you different answers along the journey of like, you asked me 100 times, you probably would have got 100 different answers as well. And so, yeah, I came to terms with it in different ways. I have had like some pretty, I've had some shit happen to me in my life, and that's definitely informed and shaped who I am and caused me to navigate my faith in a unique way, just as anyone else has shit in their life, and it's caused them to navigate ideas of spirituality. Why am I here? Is there a God? Is God good? Wherever you're coming from, I think people ask these things. I think sometimes even the most devout atheists, something can happen and they start going, oh my God, like what is going on? Maybe there is a meaning to life, or, some suffering and pain and hurt hitting you in the face, or love and joy and just amazing experiences can hit you as well. Just in the same way, these extreme things can happen to us and they tear us apart. They open us up to new ways of seeing the world and engaging with the world. And I think that definitely, being chronically ill, having my mom being chronically ill, having other family members go through different stuff, growing up poor, like whatever it might be, all these things shaped the way I was primed to engage with the topic of faith when I did. Absolutely. Yeah.
I think one other thing that would do too for people, I would think, and certainly for myself, is it really puts your focus off of this life and onto eternity in heaven, in the sense that just whatever the issue is, whether it's, not going to kill you in the next 6 months or a year, or if it's just a long-term issue. I had something that was one of those issues, not anywhere near as severe as what you're talking about, but I had very severe insomnia for about 25 years, and just every year it got worse and worse, to the point where I was waking up, so to speak, as if I'd slept, but waking up in the morning and collapsing on the floor because it just got worse and worse and worse. And it's funny, as a quick side story, I remember I had a preacher, pastor that I was under for many years. He said, the body does stuff with what's in your spirit. Like in the terms of the psychosomatic, he's like, there's a reason you can't sleep at night. You're harboring sin, Tim. And then I years later, I was up in Philadelphia, if you know the country enough. I was up in Philly, where I'm from, and a friend down here in Georgia, where I'm at now, just north of Atlanta, she got me in touch with this very special doctor. Kind of, you'd think he's a quack, and he kind of is. But he claimed that he could fix it in a month with no medicine after I'd had it for 30 years, just getting worse and worse and worse. Every sleep doctor I'd been to, all of them, none of them could do anything really, apart from just try new medicine and see if it worked, and probably wouldn't, and then we'll try something else. 30 years of that. So this doctor down here in Georgia says I can fix it in a month with no medicine. I'm like, there's no way. There's no way. I've been to the best of the best. And so he keeps his claim up. I take the challenge. I move here to Georgia. And I'll tell you the story another time what he did, but amazing. Sure enough, true to his word, within a month, I'm off my medicine. And the first time in 30 years, I can sleep, fully sleep. Wow. And I remember thinking when that was over, it wasn't sin. I wasn't sinning for 30 years. This was a medical issue, and he fixed it. I wasn't sinning. But going back to my earlier point, like it does help you focus on, like, look, this world is not your home. Don't try to fix all your medical issues. And if it doesn't work out, don't worry about it. Your home is in heaven. You'll have a glorified body. And I feel like that's one of the ways in which they kind of keep us captive for so long, is like, it doesn't really matter how bad things are here. This isn't even like reality. This is just like a preface or a shadow to the real thing. And C.S. Lewis talks a lot about that. But, we're in the shadow lands here. There's reality that's coming, and it's going to hit you, and it's going to be amazing. So keep your eyes focused on the prize. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those carrots that they just keep getting people to ignore the cognitive dissonance. I do want to, after I just took us down that rabbit trail, I do want to ask you to tell us a little bit about, going back to your time in the U.S., could you tell us what Bethel is? And just to clarify, we're not talking about the JW Bethel. Jehovah's Witnesses have a lot of Bethels all over the world. Bethel is a specific church, right? And you went there for a specific kind of training. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they're a big mega church, charismatic church. They have big bands. When their bands release CDs, they beat Beyonce, on the billboards. They come number one album every time. It's a big music, Christian music, big in the preaching. They're very famous preachers there. And they've got a big school. Yeah, basically, you imagine a Hillsong, but imagine a Hillsong where they're claiming to heal cancer, broken backs, get people out of wheelchairs, all kinds of different amazing things.
Hillsong on steroids.
So Hillsong, where they really believe in charismatic things. So I mean, like, Hillsong is a charismatic church, but you won't see many miracles there. Bethel, you go to Bethel, you'll see some shit. Now you can explain away the shit however you want, but you'll see some shit. Some shit is going down. Every meeting, shit's going down.
when you went there, was that part of your expectation to become a pastor? Like, what was your what place did that play in your
I had no
goals?
Goal, really, to be honest with you. When I went there, I just knew that they were saying that they were healing people, that they were seeing people getting saved in large numbers, that they were seeing people all over the world changing. And I know it helped me, and the beliefs that they were teaching were like, wow, this is really helpful for me. Things like they don't teach that you're sinful by nature when you're saved, which really helped me, and is a step closer to something healthy.
So you're just trying to seek God. You're just trying to seek God as much as
all I want to do is be a better Christian. That's the only objective I ever had as a Christian was, can I be a better Christian? That's all I wanted to do. Can I do this better? Can I do it right?
What was the craziest healing you saw, if you remember?
I've seen literally thousands at this point, but I remember the one that really blew my mind that I still to the day can't really explain. I was in Australia. I was traveling with one of the big preachers, and they asked us people came forward if they needed prayer for healing, and people getting up out of wheelchairs, and people that had cancer, suddenly the pain left their body, and different things that we all kind of know. And we've seen like atheist, showmen like Darren Brown and stuff do similar things. But we prayed for this guy. He was 84, and he'd been born blind. He had white eyes. He had no, I don't know the right terms, iris, cornea, like whatever. He was born completely blind. His eyes didn't have the capacity to see. And we prayed for him, and he started to see. And literally people were holding up fingers, and he was like 2, 1, 4. And his wife fell to the floor. She's like, I think it was 81 or something. And she literally falls on the floor and is wailing, like crying as though someone had just told her son had died. Like, just, you would have thought the worst thing in the world had ever happened to her, and maybe she didn't want us to see her. I don't know. But she was that overcome with emotion, and he was like crying like crazy. Like he's like freaking out that he could see. And I don't know the rational answers to that. Do I believe it was some miraculous thing? I'm sure there's probably an answer for how it works. But that one sits on the shelf where I'm like, I don't really have a good answer on that one. And that was some pretty crazy shit. But I've seen a lot of things that aren't far off that along the way that, yeah, you spend enough time in these places, you can go, oh, I can explain to you how they grow legs and how they, how pain goes away and, different things like that. And how you can be part of a placebo trial and get cured from cancer. The brain is incredible, it's extraordinary what we can do and what we can heal with the right mentalities and shifts and different things. That even healing trauma can heal conditions in our body, long-term chronic illnesses and things. So, we can do a lot of things, but I'm not sure you can do some positive thinking and start to see. So some things you're like, all right, that one's there, and it's just some cool shit I've seen once. I don't really know. I don't claim to do it. I don't let it change who I am as a person or particularly inform me, but I do sit there and going, that was a cool thing I saw once. I don't know.
That's fascinating.
So yeah, I think you saw things at Bethel that you couldn't explain. Other things you saw that you could explain all day. I saw pastors lie about what happened. I've prayed for people where I prayed for them to be healed and they weren't healed, and then the pastor shared on the Sunday morning that they were healed because it was a person in the next state over and they're never going to hear the story. And I'm like, what is happening right now? So, there's a whole spectrum of things going on, and there's good people, there's bad people, there's amazing things happening, people's lives being better. They work with people coming out of prison and give them stability and help them find jobs and help them rent a place when they're not, getting checked out by all these different housing associations and getting turned down. They're doing helpful things for people. They're helping people with addictions and stuff like that. Now, you could argue they have an ulterior motive to get people saved. Is it long-term effective, helpful, blah, blah. There's all sorts of arguments to be made. But I think at the end of the day, they have the right intention and they're trying to do the best thing they can. They're still nut jobs on many levels, as many people that are kind of come out of conventional Christianity would maybe deem it. They're still very political, very Christian nationalists, very influential in getting people to vote for people like Trump or whatever it might be. They have pretty wild views, so I was a bit of an anomaly there anyway, because they had a lot of internationals coming there to study. But most of the internationals were a bit like, okay, this is weird though. We are noticing that he's telling us that the Mormon guy who Christians typically hate, typically Protestant Christians do not like Mormons. They see them as a cult. He's telling us to vote for the Mormon guy over the Christian guy. And honestly, the only difference I can see is kind of black and white, right? Because this was Romney versus Obama. I'm sitting there and I'm like, is anyone else seeing this? And all the Christians that are American that are used to, well, you've got to vote Republican if you're a Christian, are going, I don't get it. It seems fine to me that we should vote for this Mormon guy. I was like, last week, if I said, what do you think about Mormons? You'd be like, they're going to hell, they're evil. And now you're picking them over a Christian guy. And it's like, this is a Democrat Republican thing. Is it racist? Is it a bit of both? Is there other things? So it wasn't perfect by any means. Yeah. I think they'd probably still be saying that the storming the Capitol was probably a good idea. And, they're not fully healthy humans, but who is, right? And they're in a box where God can only be one thing, and they can only vote Republican, and they can only have Donald Trump as the savior, and they can only protect themselves with a gun, even though Jesus told them to turn the other cheek. And, they're in their world, living their world. But it was very helpful for me, and it helped me grow in lots of ways. It helped me realize more about myself. I became a much healthier person. I learned much more about how to relate to people, learned a lot about how to speak in front of crowds and to larger people, larger groups of people, and probably larger people as well. Smaller people, all sizes of people. And yeah, it was a great time for me. I made lots of great friends, most of whom don't talk to me anymore, but quite a few I'm really close to still. And yeah, it was a good time.
Well, I did want to make sure I also gave you the floor to ask about kind of the big picture, which is kind of where we're here in some ways. To put it simply, what happened at that point? Because you obviously changed. Something radically changed in you. And I wanted to ask if you could, as you go through this, could you clarify as well you use the word deconstruction.
Sure.
I consistently use the word deconversion. Could you contrast those for how you see it, and just where are you with everything in terms of
Sure.
theism? If you want to kind of start
Sure.
more with what happened, but then weave that in at the appropriate stage.
Sure. So deconversion, if you have deconverted, you have deconstructed. If you have deconstructed, you may have deconverted. And so deconstruction is a much broader term. And it's actually a pretty bastardized term in a lot of ways. It's not used as it traditionally has been used. Traditionally, you hear the word deconstruction, you hear one of two things, and you're going to reveal who you are by which one you hear. One, you'll hear about people knocking down your home with a big wrecking ball and deconstructing it, right? So very much like construction, building, knocking down buildings, that kind of idea. The other thing that you might hear, and you probably would have had to play around in metaphysics and philosophy to really have heard about this, but there's a philosophical term, deconstruction. And that was coined by a guy, Jacques Derrida, and it's quite a complex, it's probably, as far as philosophy goes, it's one of the most complex philosophies you could kind of dive into. Jacques Derrida deconstructs his own views on deconstruction as he's writing them, and you're reading it going, it doesn't make sense. And it's like, yes, it's not supposed to, that is deconstruction in a sense. And so it's very complex. Even most philosophers kind of steer clear of deconstruction. It's very postmodern and a bit crazy. Now, for some reason, somehow in the last kind of 10 years, that term morphed. Someone must have been somewhat aware of Derrida's concept of deconstruction. And I won't go into that. If you want to look into it, there's some great videos out there. Leo Gura of actualize.org has a great video on deconstruction, breaking down Jacques Derrida's views and things like that. So you can look into that. But somewhere along the lines, people that were leaving conventional Christianity and changing their faith and moving away from it started to use the term deconstruction for them. And could be that they identified with some of the components of Jacques Derrida's work. Could be that they felt like they were just knocking down their home, like just smashing it down. Because most of us that have gone through that process of leaving faith know it is a painful, hard, destructive, messy process.
Can I just clarify? Is it safe to say that some people would use the word not to in any way imply that they're leaving their faith, but they're just coming to a better version of their faith?
Yes. So let me break it down. So we've done extensive research on this community. So people that identify as deconstructing, we've worked and done quite a bit of research through the Deconstruction Network, so kind of organization that I kind of head up. And basically looking at people that deconstruct, there's many different people come to many different places. So you'll have people that deconstruct their faith and still remain Christian. You are identified as Christian. You have people that deconstruct and are atheists, agnostic, spiritual but not religious. You even have people that go into other religions. And deconstruction is not a component that only happens in Christianity. You have people in ex-Muslim community and different things like that, ex-Hindu, that deconstruct their faith. And so in studying this and breaking down who are these people and what do they think and how do they think, we found there's 3 components to deconstruction. And so when I go through these, you go, oh yeah, someone that deconverts does these things. But not everyone that does these things is going to be someone that deconverts. So the first thing was that they had to question some core values of what they believed from their faith tradition. Now, most people at some point or another have questioned some core values of their faith tradition. Now, when I say core values, I don't mean, is Jesus coming back before a rapture or after a rapture? You can probably exist in most churches believing either one. Some people will be like, it's crazy Steve, but he's still fine. You could tell your pastor and he'd be like, I don't believe that, but you're fine. Just, I'm not going to let you teach on the rapture. Or, so there's certain beliefs that you're allowed to believe differently on. But the way it's a core value of your faith tradition is when you imagine telling your pastor what you're questioning. If you start sweating profusely, you're probably thinking core value, right? If you start imagining getting kicked out of church, when you think about telling your religious mother about it and she's going to disown you, you're probably thinking core values here. So we're talking, did Christ even exist? Is God good? Is there even a hell? Some of these core things that if you start questioning these, you're getting kicked out of church. You're in big trouble. So that's the first metric. Now that metric, loads of people take, plenty of people stay in churches and are quite happy. And some people question a core value and go, no, my pastor's right. So that doesn't mean much in and of itself. The second one is that you find that your faith tradition can't answer that core value successfully for you anymore. Now, it might be before you'd say, was God really good if the Holocaust happened? And you, before the pastor would go, well, God's ways are not our ways. And you go, good, okay. And you went back to normal. Now, that's concerning, but it is how people operate somehow. Psychologically, we manage the cognitive dissonance or whatever it is. Now, one day you go, yeah, but really, what about that? And the pastor goes, no, God's ways are not our ways. And you go, that's bullshit. What about that? At that point, you're starting to hit a wall. And so what happens is the second point, you have to question that questioning of that core value isn't answered by your faith tradition. And you change what you believe around that core value. So it's actually a change of belief. So this is where a lot of people see deconstruction as a very destructive process, but actually, it's actually quite a renewing process. It's about taking down that belief, but also, generally speaking, replacing it. Even if it is, I used to believe in God, and now I don't believe in God. Not believing in God is a belief, right? People go, you can't believe in nothing. And I'm like, no, I believe there is no God. That is a belief. And so, or even going, I believe, I'm not sure what I believe. That's a belief, right? So even going, I'm not sure if there is or there isn't, that's a change from I'm sure there is. And it's a belief I hold. I'm not sure. And so what you'll see is people start ticking that second box and life gets really hard, really fast. And so most people everyone that deconverts, generally speaking, ticks those two boxes really well. Deconstruction is an interesting component to the third part. And this is quite nuanced. And it often takes many years for this third part to play out, which is fascinating. But generally speaking, what we observe when we look at people that have come out of these conventional faiths over time is that they then hold those new positions with less fundamental certainty than they held the old positions. Now, you might see some people going from one fundamental to another, right? So there is a God, there is no God, and I'll wrestle you to death over it. But generally speaking, over time, even in people that are very fundamental, over time they go, okay, no, I don't believe there is a God, but I don't know either way. Like, who does know these things, right? And so what you find is they generally actually, to use some Christian terms, start to have a bit more humility about their beliefs and go, well, actually, I don't believe what I used to believe, but I have this new belief, but I'm also open to it potentially being wrong and having to grow even further and move on in my beliefs. Maybe I'm wrong. In fact, one of the things that we found, which is really interesting, is if you measure over time frames, a lot of people early on in their deconstruction jump quite heavily into atheism. There's a big spike in atheism, but atheism starts to shrink and kind of finds a kind of middle ground around kind of about 15-20%. Over the years, it starts to get within that deviation, whereas initially it kind of jumps up to about 30%. And over the years, that extra 10% usually finds itself somewhere going spiritual but not religious, but more often than not, agnostic. Where atheists start to go, well, actually, I used to really be sure there was no God because I knew what God was, and now I know it's not true. And now I'm like, actually, I don't really know, which is fascinating. But I think that's part of growing up. You talk to most old people about life, and they go, well, you think that now, but you'll realize we don't really know what the hell's going on. That might happen less in Christian circles.
It almost makes me think too, just about the idea of how critical it is to feel like there's some kind of mystery in life, and whether there is or isn't. In reality, it just feels like there's something, beyond, kind of like people would argue it from a Christian apologetics perspective. The reason that you feel like you're made for another world is because there is another world that you're made for, and we hope for that. I think evolution and seeing just the progression of it has really kept that in check for me personally, where like, for example, if you say, don't you feel like there's something guiding your life? Don't you feel like there's something bigger here? I would question, well, did the Neanderthals have that? Did the iteration of primates before them have that? And then you think about, well, if we all came from common ancestors, then what's God's plan for the frog that's getting eaten alive by the snake every day? What is his special plan for them? And why am I suddenly this special creation when you realize, evolutionary wise, we're not a special creation. We're just the latest version of a very, very long series of changes that have occurred.
Yes.
And that has kept me from thinking, to be honest, I don't see any version of spirituality as helpful at this point. I see emotional health as helpful.
Sure.
But in terms of I'm not just talking about crystals and, esoteric stuff, but even just trying to find some kind of hidden meaning or say that there's got to be an afterlife. To me, I feel like it's been really helpful to just step back from it and say, I am at this point, we're all at this point where our consciousness is doing stuff to us that we're not admitting, we're not even aware of per se.
Yep.
And it's leading us to conclusions that maybe a little bit more hyped up than we should allow. And if we were to put ourselves back a few primate iterations, we'd have that humility to say, if we're Neanderthals talking about this issue, are we really special? And I don't know if that clicks at all, but that's really helped keep me in check from thinking about all these, there's got to be something and God's got to have a plan for me. Like, no. And honestly, I land more in a nihilism at this point. I don't think any of it really matters. I don't think any of it's ever mattered. I don't think it ever will matter. But there's a freedom in that, in the sense of, you're like, well, if it never really mattered and no one's dictating what matters and what doesn't matter and what's beautiful and not beautiful, then I kind of get to pick it for myself. And there's a little bit of freedom there. And
that's the beauty, right? Is that there is no meaning, go make one. One of the things, so in our 2023 studies, one of them is we're going to be looking at some of the nuance of this. So looking at people that do shift back out of atheism will be really fascinating. But I think if you look at it closely, what you'll find is it's not a shift towards, oh, maybe there is, to a, maybe I just don't know. And so it's not a, I'm suddenly reopening up to God. I think that we'll find that. I think maybe some people have stuff happen and cause them to question, and that's nature. And, we're, like you said, like, we're wired, we've evolved in a certain way that by default, our psychology is find meaning to why this ball of atoms that your consciousness is in is here, because otherwise that's fucking terrifying. And what is this rock that's hurtling through space? And so we're naturally wanting to create some meaning. But I think we'll probably, and this is just anecdotally, I don't know, I think we'll find that most people that shift out of that atheism gap, and it's a small shift anyway, will be much more from a humility of going, well, actually, I'm just not certain about my atheism. Which technically is an agnostic position. It's also atheism. It's a big gray area between the two. Rather than I am now certain that atheism is wrong and, it's actually about crystals or meditation or whatever. I think that's probably not going to be a huge group. It'll be interesting to see which it is. Even things like how these groups identify. So spiritual but not religious as a huge group in the US, where agnostic is really small. Now, if you compare that to some other countries, what's interesting is people that are deconstructing, it's about the same percentage if you combine those two groups together, but most other countries identify as agnostic. And so what's fascinating is, on some level, a lot of people that identify as spiritual but not religious are just saying, I don't know, I think there's maybe something going on. But like it or not, for whatever reason, Americans don't teach very well on alternate theories other than Christianity. And a lot of people, genuinely, there's been polls done on Americans of, can you describe what agnostic is? Or even what's the difference between agnostic and atheist? And they don't know. And so I think there, even things like that, we have to deal with smaller niche components of, like, does someone in Georgia, Atlanta know the same terminology as someone that is brought up in London, England? Probably not. The education around religion would be very different, and they're more likely to find new ways of expressing their language. Or even you just deconstruct in the UK, and some parts of the UK, if you're in some cities, 2% identify as Christian. So if you deconstruct in that city versus deconstructing in Georgia, right, this is going to be a different process for how you go about it, what communities are available for you, how you go about the process of finding connection, given reason to some of your things, finding meaning where there might not be meaning. That might be much harder in Georgia than it is in, Aberdeen in Scotland, because you can go to a humanist meeting and suddenly we talk about how we create meaning when there definitely is no meaning. And so these are really complex things that come to bear out in these ways. But to go back to your initial question, really, deconstruction is just this very broad term. So a lot of research is done on de-churched and churched. So you go to church, you don't go to church. A lot of research is done on Christian and atheist. So you're a Christian or you're an atheist, you don't believe in God. And these are all really helpful metrics, but actually they're becoming less and less helpful as we move into a modern, global, internet-based world where people don't make these black and white decisions. The world is much more gray. People come out of Christianity very rarely go into atheism, right? If you think about when you started to question Christianity, you weren't going, oh, maybe I'll just be an atheist then. You were like, Jesus Christ, not atheism, right? Because that's the scariest idea. So you're going, maybe there's a different way to do Christianity, right? Because this is what we see as well. People that identify as Christian, that comes down as well over time. So there's a high percentage of people that identify as Christian that are deconstructing. But if I said to you, all right, you are starting in San Francisco and I want you to drive to Los Angeles and there's going to be 100 of you. And then I said, okay, we've just done a quick survey and 30 are in San Francisco. You'd be like, well, of course, more people are in San Francisco than in Los Angeles because we started in San Francisco. Maybe people are topping up for gas. Maybe people are taking their time. Maybe people are deciding they'll leave tomorrow. If you start in Christianity, of course, a higher percentage of people that are gone this process are still there. Maybe they are scared to leave because they have major societal impact like on them, right? They get cut out of their friendship circles. They lose their community. They lose their job. Maybe they're the pastor, right? I talk to pastors every day. If you look at people that deconstruct, so something that's really fascinating, people that deconstruct their faith, and you'll love this because this includes people that deconvert. They are generally, if you grab 100 people that have deconstructed and you grab 100 people that are happy and content in their local church today, the people that deconstruct read their Bible more often, read their Bible more often. Historically, they prayed more often, they attended more meetings, they were more likely to be involved, they're more likely to be on staff, they're more likely to have a degree in divinity or theology, they're more likely to have been raised with Christian education. What's fascinating is a lot of the things people throw out of going, oh, well, you never really believed, or you were never a serious Christian, or you just want to sin, or whatever. The data bears up that we have clear evidential data says these people believed more. They were more committed on your metrics. Not on anyone else's, on the metrics you provide of what makes a good Christian, reading the Bible a lot, praying a lot, going to church a lot, having said the sinner's prayer, whatever it might be. Those metrics, the group that have left the church tend to be more likely to have been serious about those things than the group that stays. And that's really fascinating because what it kind of says, which isn't too surprising if you think about it, is if you look too deeply at how the sausage is made, you're going to choose maybe the not eat the sausage, right?
Yeah. Can I ask real quick? You mentioned about atheism being a belief.
Yes,
I do just want to make sure I clarify. For a lot of us, I certainly gladly and proudly identify as an atheist, but a lot of us would be uncomfortable with the phraseology that I believe there's no God.
I'm sorry for that. Yeah.
No, you're cool. I just want to make sure I clarify that I would not want to ever say I believe there's no God. I would want to say atheism to me means there's no evidence so far of a God. I also think, I as a side note, I used to love studying linguistics. A lot of aspects of that were just mind-boggling to me. But a lot of what we talk about when we say the word God is we're drawing from our background, of course, as we all do, where we're saying the God concept that I have is like Yahweh, or to a Muslim, it's to Allah, or whatever, Krishna. If it's more esoteric, Buddha, but there's some kind of ultra divine being who's all powerful, who's probably created everything, who's probably got a plan in some sense, either deistic or he's maybe very, very intricately involved, and he's probably got a plan for the future, that involves some kind of rewards and punishment. But that system, whether it's specifically Christian or broader, it informs our word God. And we're kind of inheriting that, for better or for worse, we're inheriting that heritage of the word, when in reality, you'd have to admit, well, and this isn't my thought, I'm just summarizing other people's great thoughts, but what if there was an advanced alien race that, and I'm not trying to be conspiracy theorist here in any sense, but
no, but from a philosophical perspective.
Yeah, like if you imagine us, if you imagine that our planet with what Elon Musk is doing with these days, which is amazing, and I love seeing how the technology is improving, but if you imagine that we don't go to any kind of nuclear war, we keep ourselves from killing ourselves, nothing bad happens to our planet, we figure out climate change and all that, and we figure out how to stay alive and stay healthy, how to become at peace. And all this time, the technology improves. Eventually, fast forward, not just like 100 years, but fast forward 1,000,000 years, where humans obviously have evolved in some way and changed a little bit, but our technology, if best case scenario, it just evolves in the best sense possible. Star Trek, kind of technology becomes reality. We're at the moon every hour. You take that kind of group and you give them 1,000,000 years to evolve. And then you take that group and you send them on their spaceships to a planet where people are in a Neanderthal level, they're going to look like gods.
Yeah.
And
well, this is the plot for Star Trek, Stargate. Most of these, we go as advanced civilization, go visit the terrible like tribal people or whatever the terrible like plot devices were back in the day. They're almost always like, oh my God, look at these gods. And they're like, no, we're just people. And it's like, there's no difference. No difference.
But if you take it to its extreme and say, well, there could even be other iterations of it. You know, what if God, the sense of God, is even different than we can even verbalize right now? Maybe we don't have the words for it, but we're shrunk to it. So to say, is there a God? Well, when I say, if I were to ever use a phrase, I believe there's no God. I really do believe it. I don't use that phrase, but if I did, I'd be meaning it in the sense of, I do believe very strongly, I'm convinced more that a God like Yahweh, that is mythology. There's no way that can be real. If there is a God, and of course we have to admit there could be, but if there is a God, it is other than that. It's very different from the Yahweh character. And I think that's what most atheists that I tend to
no, you're right. I apologize. So unfortunately, this is as someone in research, this is the nightmare of research. This is why I started to do research on deconstruction, because I work with people that's huge broad thing, and I see people going, oh, people that leave the church are just atheists. And I'm like, oh, nope. I talk to thousands of people every month, and some of them are atheists. Correct. A lot of them aren't. So maybe not quite so black and white. People that leave the church don't do this. And I'm like, hold on, let's stop here. Even the people that deconstruct leave the church. Nope. Actually, some people stay in churches. I don't know how they do it, but some people do. And it's the same thing as you pointing out here, even just in the nature of talking about something. This is where Derrida would come in, right? So I don't know if you know about Derrida much, but Derrida would love your idea. Like that word God doesn't exist apart from every word that has ever been uttered by a human. Every word that has ever been uttered by a human shapes what you just said and meant when you said that word God. And when I said God after, it was shaped by every word, including your use of the word God. Like ultimately, no word exists in a vacuum, and any definition constantly evolves and grows and is unique to the individual from their subjective perspective and how they frame the language and build the universe around them. And so we're constantly at this battle. And this is the nature when we look at research done on spirituality. This is a problem, right? So you look at atheism. In research, you look at Pew Research, you look at Barna, you look at some of these big groups doing spiritual research, and some of the research really, it's a bit blunt on the group atheism, a bit blunt on the group agnostic, a bit blunt on the term Christian even. And you go, this is not right, actually. That doesn't work. It's you're brushing over. So of course, atheism is your passion in a way, right? This is what we're doing. And so it's like, Phil, don't be too blunt. Let's open that up again. And so that's why we're like, oh yeah, good point.
It's interesting too that we keep using the singular word God, and it kind of reveals our Western background.
So
like if we were talking from an Eastern perspective, why are we not saying, do you believe in God's plural? Like, why are you
exactly?
Yeah, it's just so many assumptions that we make even in asking those questions.
Yeah, and so that's what we're doing. The goal in the Deconstruction Network is largely, first of all, to help people connect. So the number one metric of people that leave a conventional faith, whether they stay identified as some form of Christian or a person that believes in God, or they become agnostic or atheist or whatever, spiritual or religious, number one metric, it's not that they miss their faith in God. It's not that they miss their relationship with God. It's not that they miss certainty. It's not that they miss meaning and purpose. These are all things that fall apart and you have to rebuild, and it's horrible. And it's tearing apart. It's not even that they miss their own identity. The number one metric is that they miss connecting with other people. That just disappears overnight, especially if you're in a very Christian environment like America. Most people just in a bubble where the only people they even really connect with is Christians. You're taught not to connect with other people unless it's to the point of getting them saved, but don't get too close. So when you lose your faith, you lose everything. So the Deconstruction Network started to help people find other people going through that process so they can connect. But off the back of it, we started to do research because we're like, this is just such an untalked about phenomenon in the research. And we talk about these groupings so bluntly, atheist, agnostic, Christian, and we want to open it up and go, there's a whole gray world here of people that are in a transitionary process that often what they tell you they are today probably change in 5 years anyway. So like, let's not lump them into too many categories too quickly, and let's look at the data and let's start demystifying. The thing that really annoyed us is you see consistently a big Christian worship singer or something. Oh, this Christian worship singer's lost his faith, and everyone cares, right? I mean, it's like the fastest growing spiritual movement is people leaving Christianity. That's the fastest growing spiritual movement in the West. More people leave Christianity than join any other faith in the West. And it's astonishing. It's such a mass movement. Over 1 million people a year are leaving Christianity in America. And that statistic is 6 years old. I reckon there's a lot more people moving out after Trump, after insurrections, after pandemics, and how churches have responded and different things. But all that to say, the narrative flying around is just horseshit, right? And you know this, the narrative, when someone, that Christian celebrity is now an atheist, and so they go, oh, well, we've got these 3 pastors to tell you what that's about. And you're like, what? Why is these pastors telling you what these people are really about, and why they just want to sin anyway, or they have no moral compass, and they just wanted to go and have sex with a dog, or I don't know, like some sort of ridiculous things they say. And you're like, really, this is, and so the goal was ideally that we create data points of going, why do people leave? Well, let's look and break down the metrics. Oh, people left because they couldn't reconcile this with their morality. Their morality evolved. You look at something like moral development theory by Kolber, and you go, they just grew up from believing that morality should be based on being punished or being rewarded. They grew up into healthy human adults, and you can't really have a God that's motivating you by punishment and reward if you've grown beyond that. You now are more moral than your God. And so being able to put these points across is, it's terrifying, isn't it? But you can't see it until you can see it. Yeah.
Well, could I ask for our remaining time? I know we've kind of talked about it in a academic sense, but I'd love to wrap up by asking a little bit more about your personal journey. And what I mean by that is, number one, of course, where have you landed? Are you still open to theism, or are you for lack of a better phrase, are you out all the way of that worldview? But then also, could you tell us about what that journey was like? I know you mentioned before in other videos in our chat, this wasn't like one day you were out. It was like a process. But at whatever point you kind of could look back and say, wow, I didn't necessarily identify it, but now that I look backwards, I'm definitely very different than what I was 6 months ago, a year ago. At whatever point you could say to yourself, I don't believe X anymore. I don't believe the Bible's the inherent word of God. I don't believe Yahweh is God, whatever that looked like. Did that scare you? And like, what were the ramifications in terms of the afterlife, or just what the meaning of life is anymore? And maybe if I could ask you to talk about what kind of backlash did you get? Did anybody kind of shun you over it? Did you get fired from your ministry jobs? Like, what was it? What was that whole journey like?
Sure. Well, I'll talk about the second part, and then we'll come to the first part. So I think for me, I've described with you, you've heard, like, I'm constantly pursuing truth, right? I'd make a good scientist. I just want to find what's true, and I'm constantly happy to disprove anything I believe. I constantly was rattling through different beliefs in my Christianity, moving from one church to the next church, trying to be the right Christian, trying to help other people be the right Christian. And I think because of that, it was quite natural to me to start to go, oh, that one's checked off. I don't believe in a conscious torment anymore. I believe in universalistic kind of view of God. And then maybe beyond that, going, oh, I don't believe in anything, or whatever it might be. Those kind of processes were quite smooth, and I've always enjoyed it. I think I enjoy the pursuit of finding what I believe to be true. Like you said, well, I just believe that the prior belief is false. I don't know if my current belief is true necessarily, but I'm holding it as a non-disproved theory right now, right? So again, scientific method all the way in all of my beliefs in a lot of way. And that's been generally quite fun and exciting, and I enjoy it. People around me don't enjoy it very much. They struggle a lot. And it has caused huge problems for me over the years. I traveled around the world. I've spoken hundreds of churches, did conferences, spoken ministry schools and colleges and things like that. Most of that's dried up pretty hard, as you can imagine. Less room for guest speakers to come in and talk about deconstructing your faith in the mega church or whatever. That's not good for your numbers, your tithing, your bankroll. So on the whole, it was fairly seamless. it's affected me massively financially, how I pay the bills. I do everything I do for free because, generally speaking, people have been so harmed in this area. I want them to have a safe person to come to that is non-judgmental, that doesn't charge anything, that isn't going to ask for money, that's just there to listen, just there to help them figure out what's next for them and where to go. And I've said again and again, if I have an atheist come to me and say, I'm interested in exploring Christianity, right? Maybe they're deconstructing their atheism and they were born atheists and that's the faith tradition they come from. I would be just as happy them figuring out that that's right for them as I would be for a Christian to become atheist. To me, every individual needs to figure out their own path. And so I could maybe argue that an atheist path might be a bit more healthy, or a Christian path might be less healthy, or, my own perspective might be there. But that's irrelevant when I'm working with people. I don't let that play in as best I can. Obviously, you can't do it perfectly. And that brings me to the first question you have. I won't answer, unfortunately, because and I say this again and again and again, I've got very strong reason for it, is that the people I work with are remarkably vulnerable. And so I don't know of many people that are as vulnerable as someone that's deconstructing their faith. Someone that's in the process of losing their faith is probably one of the most vulnerable people groups you could find. They are starting to lose their friends, their family. They have no one to talk to. They are losing their authority figures. They don't know what the meaning of life is anymore. They don't know if the purpose that was laid out before them is still their purpose, or how they'll find purpose. They don't know if there's a God there looking after them. They don't have someone to talk to in the still of the night when they've got all these questions. And often someone like me, they've just found on the internet, is the only person that they do have to talk to. And because they've come from places where, generally speaking, someone they can talk to that seems to be an authority on a topic is the person that has the right answer, and they need the right answer. I refuse to talk about where I'm at in my own ongoing unveiling of what I believe as best I can. Again, I talk about things and I'm bantering on podcasts and stuff comes out. Just because I think it's a bit unethical to, from my perspective, in my role, it's unethical for me, who has many vulnerable people coming to me for guidance, to give them the guidance. I think the last thing they need is guidance, and what they need is to learn autonomy and to learn that whatever they figure out, whether they figure out atheism is right or Christianity is right, or become a Muslim or Hindu or a spiritual, or so they start worshiping crystals or, whatever, taking shrooms. I don't care what you do. I really don't. But you need to figure it out. And I've found the hard way, because early on I was still very black and white. I was like, oh, it's not this, it is that. People just grab on to what you tell them way too hard. I don't know if you found this in your process of unraveling your faith, if you grabbed onto certain people at the beginning and went, that's it, these guys, they know the right thing. And over time you go, I don't actually agree with them on that or this. But I try and avoid to be that person, because generally speaking, far too many people make me their guru, their leader, their answer, go-to guy. And we do it wherever we're at, right? We lose our faith and we start to find, we find a new progressive Christian, or we find Richard Dawkins, or we find someone that's a big person, right? And speaks about some of these terms. And we just grab it all wholeheartedly and go, that's it. I figured it out. If I just read all of this person's books, I'll know. And I actually think sometimes what you're doing is you're stopping at the first step of your journey. When actually, potentially, that's not the right path for you. That's not the right person to check out. Maybe if you actually were more open to actually explore on your own terms, you'd find a different avenue, or you'd read 10 different books from different authors and then go, actually, that is good, but I like this more, or whatever. So yeah. I know that's a really disappointing answer, but no, it's one I've really found I need to kind of stick to on the whole. And especially because, to be honest, if you'd asked me a year ago, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, you'd have got different answers each time anyway. So by the time the podcast lands, I'll probably believe something different than I do today anyway. So
fair enough. I think my goal is, I can respect it, and I'm obviously much more clear in the sense of I'm a very proud atheist. I'm very, I would say, militant in that sense, and I often like to say, if I put 100 people in the kingdom, I'd like to take 100,000 back out. But my goal, in many ways, is more than anything, at least in the long term, is to do this. I like to describe it as a lot as a table. And I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself for my repeat viewers, probably get bored of my little pictures. But if you say this is the table of information, I'm going to put a bunch of information on it. You need to, as it were, swing out on the Spider-Man rope. You need to swing it onto the Spider-Man rope of eternity And that rope is going to consist of solid truth. And that's going to get you, as it were, over the flames of hell to the other side safely, to the banks of Jordan. And, you need to swing out into eternity knowing this is how you get to the safe place. And so this whole worldview construct, they're kind of saying, this is what you really, really need. So to me, if you have this table of saying, okay, well, where are you getting this from? What does it mean? How did it develop? How did it evolve? Who's edited it? Who's been the, kind of like where, if you have evidence that someone gets at a crime scene, like who's tampered with the evidence? Like that, I want that whole table of information. And I frequently feel like what I had as a very, very well-educated Christian young man and Bible college grad and all that, mission school grad, that if you were to portray that table, I got about 5% of it covered. It was not all incorrect information. Some of it was legitimately good information, but it was about 5% of what I would have said was appropriate to give someone to say, you have to trust this with your whole heart, mind, and soul. And to say, where's the other 95%? And I think I'm very much hopeful that I don't ever get into some kind of superstar mode either. If my channel takes off, I definitely don't want people to come looking to me for the answers or to duplicate me, but just to say, Tim is kind of like a beggar who's found where the bread is. So use him to find the bread, but he's not the bread.
Yeah.
And I'm hopeful that people will say, especially with some of the projects that, we've chatted about before, some of the projects that I'm going to be working on this year and hopefully coming out within the next 12 months or so, I hope people are going to say, wow, that 95%, you didn't put it all on the table, but you've probably given me a good 75% now. I know there's more out there, but I didn't know about the Homeric epics woven into the Gospels. I didn't know Mark being structured according to the signs of the zodiac. I didn't know about Plato being woven in so much. I didn't know about Pythagoras. I didn't know about all this stuff. I never heard of Apollonius of Tyana. Who are all these people, and why are you mentioning them as if they have anything to do with Christianity? And suddenly, as they dig into it, they're like, oh, that has a lot to do with Christianity. And I think just knowing that education level is increasing, hopefully exponentially, that to me is just a beautiful
huge
goal.
thing.
Because it's leveling the playing field and saying, if you really want to still believe this, like you said, do you want to be a Christian still? You want to be a Buddhist, whatever, but at least make your decision without people holding back. Yeah, without them holding back the information that you really deserve to have.
Yeah.
So I'm hopeful that will, and I'm hopeful that will honestly multiply. People will be like, once they see what I'm doing with this big project that's coming, that they'll be like, you know what, this should have been available. Like other people should have done it already. And hopefully people will take
hundreds
it
of years ago.
People will say, you know what, let's take what Tim did with this cool project, exposing all this stuff. And like, let's take it to a much better level. So hopefully better people than I will take it to a bigger level.
I'm excited about it.
Yeah.
Just hearing little bits. I'm really excited. And I want to be really clear when I say, for me, it would be unethical. I think you have to understand, I talk to hundreds of people in depth every day via messaging and things like that. Who are in the throes of pain, hurt, freaking out. Like, that's why I feel that for me, working on an individual level with someone like that, it just doesn't help for me to be like, well, this is what I did and this is my journey, because they will just go, let me grab that. And so I am the same deal. I'll point people to you. I will point people to Bart Ehrman. I'll point people to Richard Dawkins. I'll point people to anyone and everyone. Because I want them to have every bit of information and make those decisions. And so for me, it's much more about eking out their questions. Going, what are you questioning? What are you doubting? What's going on? Oh, let me give you 8 book recommendations on that. Let me give you 5 podcasts. Let me try and expand your options so you can start to explore and maybe find a bit more security in your doubt. Rather than you go, well, this is what I believe. And I don't see that necessarily being what you're trying to do either. I think it's a really admirable goal to help people. And again, at the end of the day, if you believe what you believe, you're kind of a dick if you don't share it, right? On some level. So I'm hypocrite here. But what I believe is it's all good and it's all going to work out and it's all fine. So I'm not so fussed. But yeah, certainly from a Christian perspective, if you believe that, you're kind of a dick if you don't share it. So I have all the, compassion in the world for the Christians that are screaming, God's coming and end is nigh, get saved. I'm like, well done. You actually believe this shit. Like, hats off to you.
Hitchens was actually like that, where Hitchens was frustrated if you followed him when he was alive. He, I mean, I wasn't deconverted at that point, so I wasn't following him when he was alive, but following his story, looking back at it. He was frustrated where he would try to debate people and they would kind of get wishy-washy. And he finally found some people here and there in different pockets where they're like, no, if I was back in ancient Israel, I would have killed the Amalekites, where other people be like, no, I don't think I would have done that. I would have schmoozed over. I wouldn't have stoned people to death. And then you find these Christians who are like, no, I'd pick up stones and stone my kid to death.
Yeah.
Like, you believe it. I want to talk to you because you actually believe what you claim. And but I also want to mention just a lot of respect for what you said 5 minutes ago about just the vulnerability of people. I'm the same way, that I don't get anywhere near as many emails as you, but people do reach out to me consistently, and you hear people's hearts, just they're wringing their hearts in pain over what's happening. Many of them losing a lot of relationships over it. Many of them just lost, like, what the hell just happened in the last 30 years? I guess it meant nothing. And the vulnerability is so huge, and it's so painful. And for some reason, I was luck of the draw, spared a lot of it. I felt like as soon as I was out, I was like, I won the lottery. This is great. My deception is like lifted. I felt great. Maybe I did my grieving beforehand. I don't know. But a lot of people, that's not the case. They realize they put these pieces together and they're in so much pain. And I appreciate you pointing that out. And we need to be very sensitive. This is not just an academic thing. Like, do you know about the mythology? Do you know about this? Like, how are you doing in your heart grappling through this stuff?
Yeah. Well, our first 2023 study will be on well-being and how deconstruction affects people and how it affects them long-term as well. And I think that will be really exciting. So me and you are anomalies. We go into this like screaming like a cowboy, spinning our lasso and like hat in the other hand going, yeehaw. We love the process of like learning and challenging what we believe in. When we come out, we're like, wow, that's exciting. What's next? That's an anomaly. After talking to tens of thousands of people, I can tell you we are a small group, and we'll get actual data on that at some point. It'll be really interesting. Maybe I'm wrong. But I think it's a very small group. Other factors come in. Do our partners come with us? Do we have friendship circles? There's lots of things that play into how much easier it can be. But I think as we track it, what's fascinating is a lot of people watching deconstruction from the outside do see people that suddenly are depressed, suddenly have anxiety, overwhelmed, have panic attacks, all these different things. And they see it as God's no longer with them, the devil's attacking them, the whatever. And there's a lot of data out there actually that people in church and people that leave church, the wellness, mental health, different things like that, is much higher and better for people in churches. Now, there's part of that to do with being in a community. Part of it's to do with the self-deception of you think you're doing well and you don't realize that you have crippling depression because you're not allowed to be depressed because the fruit of the spirit is joy, not depression or some crazy metric. So there's all sorts of different things to play. But what I do think will happen, and this bears up in my anecdotal evidence talking to people for 10 plus years, is that in time, people get to a place that might be really hard early on. They get to a place that is so healing and freeing and healthy, and people actually engage with some of this stuff that, at first makes it feel like you're being run over by a steamroller, but you never dealt with that for 20, 30, 50, 60 years while in the church. You never learned to engage emotionally with some of these things. You never dealt with the trauma. You never dealt with the trauma of growing up believing you're filthy, rotten, and God hates you. But he kind of just sees Jesus instead, so he feels good. And you're going to spend eternity with that guy, but he really wants to punish you. So if Jesus steps out the room, you're fucked. Not quite, but there's some traumatic kind of components at play in these things. Once we deal with that, I think the health that comes out on the other side, the health that comes from building our own meaning rather than having it dictated to us by, I don't know, some pastor that gives us some encouragement in a certain direction or whatever. And it's not something we're that passionate about, but I'm passionate because I'm a Christian, or like, these are great things that are happening for people, but it does look terrifying, and it is terrifying and hard for people. Like, you can't, the amount of Christians that say, oh, people that deconstruct just want to sin, or they just want things to be easier, or they do it because it's the cool thing to do. I don't know anyone that deconstructed and came out with more friends. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's not like everyone was lined up going, whoa, look at Tim, he's so cool now. No, most of my friends are like, ugh, look at this guy, fuck him, he's out. Like, it's not going to happen. Like, you don't do this as a popularity contest. You don't do it as and so a lot of people just have no idea how hard it is. And a lot of people think they're on their own doing it. And so the work that you're doing, the work that I'm doing, the more people that are doing this, helping people, showing them different options, just letting them know they're part of something. Like, the simple fact that there's over 1 million people in America leaving their conventional faith every day. When I talk to people and they go, I literally thought I was the only person in the world. I can't believe that you're here. And there's thousands of people following you. There must be thousands of us. And I'm like, guys, welcome to reality. There's millions of us. I'm just really bad at social media.
Well, the picture
that's a liberating thought.
It is. And the picture you painted too, it reminds me of that scene in The Matrix, the original one, where they finally get Neo for the first time ever out of his pod, and they're reconstructing his body, and he opens his eyes for the very first time. And he says, why do my eyes hurt so much? And Morpheus says, because you've never used them before.
Never used them.
And it's very weird. And we do need to, give those people, like, to try to put ourselves back in their shoes. Like, how weird did it feel in the first few days, first few months? Like, how hard and painful was it? And yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to be able to help people going through it. So, I know I've kept you for a long time. Hopefully I haven't kept you too late for your next meeting.
No, it's great. It's been fantastic. I loved it. This is my last thing for the day. I'm going to go play video games while my wife finishes work.
Awesome. Well, I just want to wrap up then by saying we've been speaking with Phil Drysdale. For everyone, again, that doesn't know Phil, please click on the links beneath our video. Go check him out, like and subscribe and all that. And Phil, thank you for what you've been doing. You've been doing it for a while now. Great conversations, great insights. I do just want to also put a quick plug in for anyone that does go to Phil's channel. Look for a specific series he has called Is God Really Good? It's I think a little bit older. I think it's 4 videos, but it's a playlist there. Is God Really Good? Fantastic. Love that. But everyone, please support Phil. And Phil, thank you so much for sharing your story and your insights today. I'd love to chat again down the line and connect and hear how your research is going.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed it. It's so funny you mentioned that series, because that's meant for Christians grappling to try and rebuild some form of Christianity that still allows God to be good. So it's funny to hear it, because I came up with that 10 years ago probably. I think the recording is from when I visited a church like 5 years ago or something. But I'm glad you enjoyed
questions,
it.
Though. Critical questions.
Huge questions, and Christians don't ask them. That's what I love doing, going into churches and asking those questions, and then just knowing I'd never get an invite back.
For sure. Well, thank you so
Tim,
much.
thank you very much. It's been a joy. Thank you.
Absolutely. Likewise. Thank you.
All right. Catch you later, man. Love you, man. Bye.
Yes, sir.